The rain started before dawn and never stopped. By the time I arrived at the cemetery, the sky looked like a sheet of wet concrete hanging over the city. Hundreds of mourners stood beneath black umbrellas, whispering condolences and sharing memories of my father. I barely heard any of them. For 3 weeks I'd been living in a fog. My father was gone. The man who taught me how to ride a bike, fix an engine, and survive disappointment had disappeared from my life forever. Nothing felt real anymore. I adjusted my black tie and walked toward the row of luxury vehicles waiting near the cemetery entrance. One limousine stood apart from the others. It was longer, newer, and reserved exclusively for immediate family. My father had personally arranged it months before his death. At least that's what his attorney had told me. As his only son, I naturally headed toward it. But before I could reach the door, the driver stepped directly into my path. "Sorry, sir." I frowned. "Excuse me?" "The vehicle is already occupied." His tone wasn't respectful. It wasn't apologetic. It was almost amused. I glanced at the limousine. "Occupied by who?" The driver smirked. "The heir." For a second I thought I'd heard him wrong. "The heir?" "Yes, sir." He pointed toward the tinted window. "The gentleman inside inherited everything." A strange sensation crawled up my spine. Something wasn't right. I stepped closer and looked through the dark glass. At first, all I saw were shadows. Then my eyes adjusted, and my entire world stopped. Inside the limousine sat my wife. Next to her sat another man. His arm rested comfortably around her waist. She wasn't pushing him away. She wasn't uncomfortable. She looked happy. Worse than happy. She looked relieved. The man was Marcus, her tennis instructor. The same man she'd spent years assuring me was just a friend. The same man whose name always appeared on her phone. The same man she'd defended every time I asked questions. Now he sat beside her like he belonged there, as if he had already replaced me. I felt my stomach twist, but the nightmare wasn't over. Across from them sat my mother-in-law. Beside her sat my brother-in-law. All 4 of them were laughing. At my father's funeral, one of them raised a champagne glass. Another clinked theirs against it. For a moment, I honestly wondered if grief had finally broken my mind. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But then Marcus leaned over and kissed my wife's cheek. And everyone inside laughed even harder. The driver folded his arms. "Looks like they're celebrating." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. 27 years of marriage flashed through my mind. Every anniversary, every sacrifice, every promise, every lie. Suddenly, all the little moments I'd ignored began connecting together. The late-night text messages, the mysterious weekend trips, the expensive gifts she couldn't explain, the growing distance, the coldness, the excuses, the secrets. I had spent years convincing myself nothing was wrong. Now the truth sat behind a limousine window, smiling. My wife finally noticed me. For a brief second, our eyes met. I expected panic. I expected guilt. I expected shame. Instead, she rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes, as if I was the inconvenience, as if I was interrupting her celebration. Something inside me died at that exact moment. Not my heart. Not my pride. Something deeper. The version of me that still believed she loved me. That man disappeared forever. My wife opened the limousine door. She stepped out elegantly, adjusting her designer coat. Marcus followed immediately behind her. His hand rested on her back. Comfortable, possessive, confident, like he'd already won. My mother-in-law emerged next. Then my brother-in-law. All 4 stood before me. None of them looked embarrassed. None of them looked nervous. They looked victorious. My wife crossed her arms. "Richard," I nodded. "Isabella," she glanced toward the limousine. "You should probably take one of the other cars." One of the other cars, at my own father's funeral. My brother-in-law laughed softly. "The family vehicle is full." Family. Interesting choice of words. My mother-in-law shook her head dramatically. Please don't make a scene today. A scene. Apparently watching your wife celebrate with her lover at your father's funeral wasn't enough to justify being upset. I studied each of their faces carefully. For the first time in years I saw them clearly, not as family, not as people who loved me, but as predators who believed their prey was already dead. And that realization brought something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness, not forgiveness, peace. Because once you stop expecting loyalty from people who have none, their betrayal loses its power. I smiled, a real smile. Their expressions changed immediately. Confusion replaced confidence. They had expected anger, tears, a breakdown. Instead, I simply nodded. You're right. The word surprised them. Even surprised me. This isn't the place for a scene. Silence. Marcus shifted awkwardly. My wife narrowed her eyes. Something about my calmness bothered her. Good. Let it bother her. I turned and walked away without another word. Behind me I heard whispers, confused whispers, nervous whispers. Because for the first time, their script wasn't working, and none of them knew why. The moment I reached my car, my phone vibrated. A message. Not from a friend, not from a relative. From my father's attorney. 3 words. Call me immediately. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I looked back toward the limousine. The 4 people who had spent years pretending to be my family were still standing together, talking, smiling, certain of their victory. They had no idea what message had just arrived. And neither did I. I climbed into my car and drove away from the cemetery. The rain hammered against the windshield. Traffic blurred into streaks of light. My thoughts moved even faster. My father had never trusted easily. He'd spent 40 years building a business empire from nothing. By the time he retired, he owned shipping contracts, warehouses, commercial properties, and investments spread across multiple states. Everything he'd built was worth tens of millions. For years, my wife had shown an unusual interest in his estate planning. At the time, I thought she was simply helping my aging father organize paperwork. Now I wasn't so sure. The attorney answered on the first ring. Richard? His voice sounded tense. Where are you? Driving. Good. Don't go home. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. What happened? A pause, then another. Finally, he spoke. Someone tried to access your father's private trust accounts this morning. My pulse quickened. Who? We're still investigating. Something in his tone told me he already knew. Tell me. More silence. Then he exhaled heavily. The request came from an individual claiming to possess authority through marriage. My stomach dropped. Marriage. Not inheritance. Marriage. My wife. The realization hit like a freight train. She hadn't been celebrating because my father was gone. She'd been celebrating because she believed she had already won. She believed access to his fortune was guaranteed. The attorney continued. There's something else. I pulled into an empty parking lot. Rain pounded against the roof. What? Your father anticipated this. Those 4 words changed everything. What do you mean? He left instructions. The attorney's voice lowered. Specific instructions. A strange feeling settled over me. For weeks I had felt powerless. Now, for the first time, curiosity began replacing grief. What instructions? He requested that I wait until after the funeral to deliver certain information. My father's face flashed through my mind, his stubborn smile, his sharp instincts, the way he could read people within minutes, sometimes better than they could read themselves. What information? Meet me at the office. Why can't you tell me now? Because you need to see it yourself. An hour later, I walked into his downtown office. The attorney greeted me personally. No assistants, no receptionists, no interruptions, just the 2 of us. That alone told me this was serious. He led me into a private conference room. A large envelope sat on the table. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. My chest tightened instantly. I'd recognize that handwriting anywhere. The attorney took a seat. I haven't opened it. I slowly picked up the envelope. The paper felt strangely heavy, as if the contents weighed far more than paper should. Carefully, I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. I unfolded it. The first line nearly stopped my heart. "Richard, if you're reading this, it means I was right." I sat down immediately. The attorney remained silent. I continued reading. "For the last 3 years, I have suspected that certain people around our family are not who they pretend to be." My eyes widened. 3 years. My father had suspected something 3 years ago. Long before I did. Long before today's funeral. Long before the limousine. The letter continued. "I hired private investigators. Everything that follows has been verified." I stopped breathing. Investigators? Verified? My hands began shaking. Attached behind the letter was a thick stack of documents. Photos. Bank records. Travel records. Hotel receipts. Phone logs. The evidence was overwhelming and devastating. My wife hadn't been seeing Marcus for months. She hadn't been seeing him for years. The affair had lasted nearly 8 years. 8 years. My vision blurred. For nearly a decade, I'd been funding family vacations, anniversary dinners, and luxury gifts, while my wife maintained a secret second life. But it got worse. Much worse. The investigation revealed conversations between my wife, her mother, her brother, and Marcus. Hundreds of conversations, most focused on one topic. Money, not love, not relationships. Money. The attorney slid another folder toward me. "You should read this." I opened it. Inside were transcripts. One conversation immediately caught my attention. My wife speaking to Marcus. "When Richard's father dies, everything changes." Another. "We just need to be patient." Another. "He never notices anything." Another. "The inheritance solves all our problems." I felt physically sick. Not because they wanted money. Greed wasn't surprising. What destroyed me was discovering that my entire marriage had become a business strategy, a long-term financial investment, a performance, an act. The woman I loved hadn't been building a future with me. She'd been waiting for a payout. The attorney remained quiet while I absorbed everything. Eventually, I looked up. Did my father know all of this? Most of it. Most of it. The phrase echoed inside my head. "Why didn't he tell me?" The attorney answered carefully. "Because he believed you wouldn't believe him." Deep down, I knew he was right. 5 years ago, I would have defended my wife. 3 years ago, I would have defended her. Even 6 months ago, I probably would have defended her. Love can blind intelligent people, and I had been completely blind. I looked back at the documents. Then I noticed something unusual. Several pages were highlighted. I flipped to them. Bank transfers. Large bank transfers. Amounts that made no sense. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, repeated over and over. My wife hadn't simply been cheating, she had been stealing. For years, money had disappeared from joint accounts. Investment funds, family trusts, business distributions, small enough to avoid attention, large enough to accumulate millions. The total sat at the bottom of the final page. I stared at the number, then read it again and again. Because surely I was mistaken. Surely I had misunderstood, but I hadn't. The total exceeded $4 million. $4 million. The room became completely silent. The attorney folded his hands. "Now you understand why your father prepared this." I nodded slowly. The funeral betrayal suddenly looked small compared to this. What happened in the limousine wasn't the crime. It was merely the celebration. The real theft had been happening for years, and for the first time, I understood something important. They weren't celebrating a victory. They were celebrating what they believed was the end of the investigation. They thought my father had taken the truth to his grave. They thought all evidence was gone. They thought nobody would ever know. I carefully placed the documents back into the folder. Then I looked directly at the attorney. What happens next? His expression changed. For the first time that day, he smiled. That depends. On what? How patient you're willing to be. Outside, the storm continued. But inside that office, something had changed. For the first time since my father's death, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about strategy. And strategy had always been my father's specialty. For the next 2 weeks, I disappeared. At least that's what everyone believed. I stopped answering calls. I ignored messages. I canceled meetings. Even close friends assumed grief had overwhelmed me. That assumption worked perfectly, because while everyone thought I was falling apart, I was rebuilding. Every morning began inside a private conference room. The attorney sat on one side, a forensic accountant sat on the other. Stacks of evidence covered the table. By the end of the first week, the picture became much larger than anyone expected. The missing $4 million wasn't the final number. It was only the beginning. Money had moved through shell companies, fake consulting agreements, luxury purchases disguised as business expenses, hidden accounts. The more we uncovered, the uglier the truth became. Meanwhile, my wife seemed unusually relaxed. Mutual friends occasionally reported seeing her at restaurants with Marcus. Expensive restaurants, expensive vacations, expensive celebrations. Apparently, she believed the future was secure. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. One afternoon, the forensic accountant pushed a folder toward me. You'll want to see this. Inside was a purchase agreement, a waterfront property, purchased 6 months earlier. The buyer's name wasn't Marcus. It wasn't my wife. It was a corporation secretly owned by both of them. I stared at the paperwork. The down payment alone exceeded $500,000. Money doesn't simply appear. Money leaves footprints. And those footprints always lead somewhere. The accountant smiled slightly. We found the source. I leaned forward. Show me. The paper trail connected directly back to accounts my wife believed nobody monitored. Accounts funded with stolen family money. The evidence was airtight, legally, financially, criminally. For the first time, I understood why my father valued documentation so much. People lie. Numbers don't. 3 days later, my wife finally called. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. Her voice sounded strangely sweet, artificially sweet, like an actress reading lines. Richard? Yes. A pause. She wasn't expecting me to answer. How are you? Interesting question. After stealing millions? After an 8-year affair? After celebrating? During my father's funeral? She wanted to know how I was. I'm managing. More silence. Then she carefully moved toward her real objective. We need to discuss the estate. There it was. Not grief, not marriage, not reconciliation. The estate. Money remained the center of everything. I let her continue. She explained how difficult the past few weeks had been, how stressful everything felt, how important family unity was, how we should avoid conflict. The performance was impressive. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed her. Finally, she asked the question she'd wanted to ask from the beginning. When will the inheritance process be completed? I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Soon. Her relief was obvious. Very obvious. She thought she was getting answers. In reality, she was giving them. Every conversation was being documented. Every statement recorded. Every contradiction preserved. Because people who believe they're winning become careless, and careless people reveal everything. A week later, the trap was ready. The attorney arranged a formal family meeting. Officially, the purpose involved final estate disclosures. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. The meeting took place in my father's former corporate headquarters, a building he had loved, a building that carried his name above the entrance. The symbolism wasn't accidental. One by one, they arrived. My wife entered first. confident, elegant, smiling. Marcus arrived shortly afterward. He wasn't technically invited, but apparently nobody had informed him. My mother-in-law appeared next, then my brother-in-law. Watching them enter felt surreal. None of them looked nervous. None of them suspected anything. Why would they? For years, deception had worked perfectly. Success creates arrogance, and arrogance destroys caution. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. A massive polished table filled the center. Legal files rested neatly at each seat. The attorney welcomed everyone. Then the meeting began. For the first 30 minutes, everything appeared normal. Financial summaries, asset reviews, trust structures, tax considerations, boring legal details, exactly as expected. My wife gradually relaxed. Marcus even checked his phone repeatedly. That would prove to be a mistake, because the moment people stop paying attention is often the moment everything changes. The attorney closed one folder, then opened another. His expression became serious. Before proceeding further, we need clarification regarding several financial irregularities. The atmosphere changed instantly. My wife shifted in her chair. My brother-in-law stopped smiling. Marcus lowered his phone. The attorney continued. Over the past 8 years, significant funds appear to have been transferred from protected accounts. Nobody spoke. The room became completely silent. He projected documents onto a large screen, account numbers, transfer dates, transaction histories. The evidence stretched across years, page after page, transaction after transaction. The color drained from my wife's face. For the first time, genuine fear appeared. Not concern, not confusion, fear. The attorney calmly explained each transfer, each hidden payment, each unauthorized withdrawal. Every document connected perfectly to the next, like pieces of a puzzle my father had quietly assembled before his death. Marcus attempted to interrupt. The attorney immediately stopped him. No. The word landed like a hammer. This presentation will continue. The next slide appeared. Corporate records. Property. Acquisitions, shell companies, luxury purchases. Then came the waterfront property. The room exploded. My mother-in-law stood up. My brother-in-law started shouting. Marcus demanded explanations. My wife looked ready to faint. The attorney simply waited. Chaos always burns itself out eventually. And when it did, he delivered the final blow. We have already provided copies of these findings to federal investigators. Silence. Absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For several seconds, the entire room froze. Then Marcus spoke. What investigators? The attorney's answer was calm, very calm. The ones currently reviewing financial fraud allegations. Watch their faces carefully, because moments like these reveal character. Some people become angry. Some become emotional. Some become desperate. Marcus became terrified. My wife wasn't far behind. She finally turned toward me, not toward the attorney, not toward the evidence, toward me, as if I could somehow save her, as if 27 years of marriage would erase 8 years of betrayal. Her eyes filled with panic. Richard, that single word carried more fear than anything she'd said during our entire marriage. For the first time, she understood. The inheritance wasn't coming. The celebration had been premature, and the game they thought was finished had only just begun. Outside the conference room windows, sunlight reflected across the city. The storm from the funeral was gone, but a much bigger storm had finally arrived. And this one belonged to them. Everything happened faster than anyone expected. Within days, investigators froze multiple accounts connected to the stolen funds. Marcus disappeared. First, the confident man from the limousine suddenly stopped answering calls. Friends abandoned him. Business partners distanced themselves. His luxury lifestyle collapsed almost overnight. My brother-in-law wasn't far behind. Financial records connected him to several fraudulent transactions. The same people who once celebrated with him now avoided him completely. Then came the divorce. For months, my wife tried every strategy imaginable. Apologies, excuses, tears, promises, nothing worked. Because trust isn't destroyed in a single moment. It's destroyed one lie at a time, and she had spent 8 years destroying it. The final surprise came from my father. Several weeks after the investigation began, the attorney invited me back to his office. He handed me one final envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note. "Richard, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come out. Remember something important. The greatest victory is not revenge. It's freedom. Don't waste your future looking backward. Build something better. Love." Daddy sat there for a long time staring at those words. For months, I had focused on exposing betrayal, but my father was right. The real victory wasn't watching them lose. The real victory was surviving what they did and still moving forward. A year later, my life looked completely different. The divorce was finalized. The stolen assets were recovered. The investigations continued without me. For the first time in years, peace returned. One afternoon, I visited my father's grave. The weather was clear. No rain, no storm. Clouds, no anger, just silence. I stood there and smiled. Not because justice had won, not because my enemies had lost, but because I finally understood something. The people who betrayed me spent years chasing money, years chasing shortcuts, years chasing someone else's success, and in the end, they lost everything. Meanwhile, I gained something far more valuable, a second chance. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. Then I looked toward the horizon. A new chapter was waiting, and this time, I was walking into it with open eyes.